15 years ago, David Collins, a 39-year-old construction foreman, and his 12-year-old son Ryan embarked on what was supposed to be a simple father-son camping trip in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. They never returned home. The disappearance plunged David's wife Sarah and their daughter Emma into unimaginable grief, while their tight-knit Denver suburb community was left searching for answers that seemed to vanish like morning mist in the mountain air. The local sheriff's department considered multiple possibilities: animal attacks, getting lost in treacherous terrain, accidental falls. But despite extensive search operations involving dozens of volunteers and professional rescue teams, no trace of the father and son was ever found. This failure ignited fury within the Collins family, who refused to accept that their loved ones had simply vanished without explanation. For 15 years, they fought tirelessly to keep the case alive, determined that the truth would eventually surface. Before we continue, subscribe, like this video, and ring the notification bell. This helps the channel bring you more stories like this one. Sarah Collins still remembers that Friday afternoon in June 2009, when David loaded their blue Ford pickup with camping gear, his excitement infectious as he talked about teaching Ryan how to properly set up a tent and identify constellations. The boy had been struggling in school, dealing with bullying, and David believed that some quality time in nature would help restore his son's confidence. They planned to spend 3 days at a remote campsite David had discovered during his construction work, a pristine location near Crystal Creek, accessible only by a winding dirt road that twisted through dense pine forests. When Sunday evening arrived and David's truck didn't pull into their driveway, Sarah initially felt only mild concern. David was known for his spontaneous nature, and she reasoned they might have decided to extend their adventure by a day. But as Monday morning dawned without any word, that concern crystallized into cold fear. David was meticulous about his work schedule and would never miss a job without calling. Sarah contacted his foreman, his friends, anyone who might have heard from them. Nobody had. The official search began on Monday afternoon when Sarah filed a missing persons report with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Mark Harrison, a seasoned officer who had handled numerous missing person cases in the Rockies, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. The mountains were unforgiving, especially to inexperienced campers, though David was far from inexperienced. He had been hiking and camping since childhood, knew the wilderness like his own backyard. Within hours, search and rescue teams were dispatched to the Crystal Creek area. What they found at the supposed campsite sent chills through even the most hardened rescuers. David's pickup truck sat perfectly parked beside a cluster of aspen trees, keys still in the ignition, camping gear neatly arranged in the bed as if they had just arrived. The campsite itself showed no signs of occupancy. No tent, no fire ring, no evidence that David and Ryan had ever been there. It was as if they had simply stepped out of the truck and been swallowed by the mountain itself. The initial investigation revealed troubling inconsistencies. David's wallet remained in the truck, containing over $300 in cash, an unlikely detail if they had encountered robbery or foul play. His cell phone was there too, the battery dead, but showing no outgoing calls or messages after their departure from Denver. Most disturbing of all, Ryan's inhaler was found on the dashboard. The boy suffered from mild asthma, and Sarah knew he would never venture far from his medication, especially at the high altitude of the mountains. As days stretched into weeks, the search expanded across hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain. Helicopter crews scoured valleys and ridges, while ground teams with search dogs combed through thick forests and rocky outcroppings. The Colorado National Guard joined the effort, bringing sophisticated equipment and experienced personnel. Despite their collective expertise and determination, they found nothing. No clothing, no camping equipment, no human remains. David and Ryan Collins had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions that multiplied with each passing day. The case officially went cold after 6 months of intensive investigation, filed away in a cabinet that Sarah Collins visited monthly, demanding updates that never came. But for the Collins family, the search never ended. They organized their own volunteer searches, posted flyers throughout Colorado, and maintained a Facebook page that kept their story alive in the digital age. Sarah's faith never wavered. Somewhere in those vast mountains lay the truth about what happened to her husband and son, and she would spend every remaining day of her life fighting to uncover it. The aftermath of David and Ryan's disappearance transformed the Collins household into a shrine of suspended time. Sarah found herself unable to change anything in their shared spaces. David's coffee cup still sat by the kitchen sink. Ryan's Pokémon cards remained scattered across his bedroom floor, exactly where he had left them that Friday afternoon. Their absence became a presence unto itself, filling every corner of the house with what psychologists call ambiguous loss, the peculiar grief that comes from loving someone who is neither provably dead nor definitively alive. Emma Collins, only 14 when her father and brother vanished, bore witness to her mother's transformation from a vibrant elementary school teacher into a relentless investigator consumed by the need for answers. The teenager watched as Sarah converted their dining room into a makeshift command center, covering the walls with topographical maps of the Rocky Mountains, photographs from the search efforts, and timelines documenting every lead, every phone call, every dead end. The cheerful family dinners of Emma's childhood became solitary affairs, punctuated only by the sound of Sarah's fingers typing late into the night, reaching out to psychics, private investigators, and amateur sleuths who promised hope but delivered only heartbreak. The financial toll proved as devastating as the emotional one. Sarah exhausted their savings account funding private search efforts, hiring helicopter pilots to survey areas the official search teams had deemed too dangerous or unlikely. She mortgaged their suburban Denver home twice, liquidating David's retirement account and selling his tools, the very instruments that had built their comfortable middle-class life. Friends and neighbors organized fundraisers, but the money evaporated as quickly as it arrived, consumed by the insatiable appetite of an investigation that seemed to feed on hope while offering nothing in return. Deputy Mark Harrison, the lead investigator on the case, found himself haunted by the Collins disappearance in ways that 20 years of law enforcement had never prepared him for. In his cramped office at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, he maintained his own unofficial file on the case, thick with witness statements, search reports, and his own handwritten theories. Harrison had seen countless missing person cases in the Rockies, hikers who fell from cliffs, campers who succumbed to exposure, outdoorsmen who simply got lost and never found their way home. But the Collins case defied every pattern he knew. The absence of evidence became evidence itself. Experienced outdoorsmen like David Collins don't simply vanish without leaving traces, especially when accompanied by a child. The positioning of their truck, the untouched campsite, the presence of Ryan's inhaler, these details suggested something far more sinister than a tragic accident. Harrison began investigating alternative theories, quietly exploring whether David might have been involved in something that made him a target. Financial records showed no unusual activity, no debts to dangerous people, no hidden aspects of his life that might explain why someone would want to harm him. As the first anniversary of their disappearance approached, the Collins family organized a vigil at the base of the Crystal Creek Trail. Hundreds of community members gathered, holding candles and sharing memories of David's infectious laughter and Ryan's quiet determination to overcome his struggles with bullying. Sarah spoke to the crowd with a voice that had grown stronger through suffering, her words carrying across the mountain air like a prayer. They are still out there, and I will never stop looking for them. A mother knows when her child is gone, and I know Ryan is still fighting to come home. The vigil attracted media attention that briefly reignited public interest in the case. Local news stations ran follow-up stories, and a true crime podcast devoted 3 episodes to examining the evidence. Tips poured in from across the country, people who claimed to have seen David and Ryan at gas stations in remote towns, witnesses who reported suspicious activity in the mountains around the time of their disappearance. Each lead demanded investigation, and Sarah pursued them all with the desperate energy of someone who understood that hope, however false, was the only thing keeping her alive. But as summer turned to autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter, the tips stopped coming. The podcast moved on to other mysteries, the news cycle swept the story away, and the Collins family found themselves alone again with their questions and their unshakable belief that somewhere in the vast wilderness of Colorado, the truth was waiting to be discovered. The mountains kept their secrets and time moved forward, while Sarah Collins remained frozen in that moment 15 years ago when her husband and son drove away into a mystery that would define the rest of her life. 5 years had passed since David and Ryan Collins vanished into the Rocky Mountain wilderness, and the case had settled into the bureaucratic limbo reserved for investigations that produce more questions than answers. Deputy Mark Harrison, now promoted to Detective Harrison, carried the Collins file like a weight in his chest, a constant reminder of the one case that refused to release its grip on his conscience. The thick manila folder had grown heavy with witness statements, search reports, and his own increasingly desperate theories, each page representing another dead end in a maze of unanswered questions. Sarah Collins had aged a decade in those 5 years. Her once bright auburn hair had turned prematurely grey, and deep lines etched themselves around eyes that had cried too many tears to count. She had returned to teaching, finding that working with children provided the only respite from her obsessive search for answers. Her students knew nothing of her tragedy. She became Mrs. Collins, the cheerful fourth-grade teacher by day, then transformed back into Sarah, the relentless investigator by night, combing through online forums and cold case databases with the dedication of someone who understood that stopping meant accepting defeat. Emma Collins, now 19 and away at college, struggled with survivor's guilt that no amount of therapy seemed to diminish. She had chosen a university in California, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of her childhood home, where time had stopped on that June afternoon in 2009. During phone calls home, she listened to her mother's latest theories about what might have happened to Dad and Ryan, nodding along while silently wondering if Sarah would ever be able to move forward with her life. Emma loved her mother fiercely, but she also recognized that the search had become an addiction, a way to avoid confronting the possibility that David and Ryan were truly gone. The official investigation had long since been relegated to inactive status, though Detective Harrison continued to review the file whenever new missing person cases emerged in the Rocky Mountain region. He had developed his own theory over the years, one that he shared with no one, not even his partner: the pristine condition of the campsite, the untouched truck, the strategic placement of Ryan's inhaler. These details suggested staging, as if someone wanted the disappearance to look like an accident, while ensuring it remained permanently mysterious. Harrison had quietly investigated David's background more thoroughly than the original case file indicated. What he discovered painted a picture of a man beloved by his community, but harboring no dark secrets that might explain his fate. David's construction company colleagues described him as reliable and honest, someone who took pride in his work and never cut corners. His friends spoke of a devoted father who coached Little League and never missed one of Ryan's baseball games. Even his ex-wife from a brief marriage in his 20s had nothing but positive things to say about David's character. The detective had also spent considerable time studying the geography around Crystal Creek, becoming intimately familiar with every trail, every cliff face, every hidden valley where two people might have met with disaster. He had hiked the area dozens of times, sometimes alone, sometimes with search and rescue volunteers who shared his obsession with solving the case. They found old mining shafts, forgotten campsites, and the occasional bones of wildlife, but never any trace of the Collins men. As the 5th anniversary approached, Sarah organized another vigil, though the crowd was noticeably smaller this time. The community's attention had moved on to more recent tragedies, and Sarah found herself speaking to a gathering of perhaps 30 people instead of the hundreds who had attended previous memorials. Her words carried the same determination, but Detective Harrison noticed a fragility in her voice that hadn't been there before, the sound of someone whose faith was being tested by the relentless passage of time. During the vigil, a new volunteer approached Sarah with information that would prove to be just another false lead. Maria Santos, a recent retiree who had taken up hiking as a hobby, claimed to have found a child's sneaker near a remote section of the Crystal Creek Trail. Sarah's heart raced as she examined the weathered shoe, but her hope crumbled when she realized it was the wrong brand, the wrong size, probably dropped by any of the thousands of families who had hiked those trails over the years. That night, alone in her house filled with memories and unanswered questions, Sarah sat in David's favorite chair and allowed herself to consider what she had never been willing to contemplate before: the possibility that she might never know what happened to her husband and son. The thought terrified her more than death itself, because it meant that the rest of her life would be defined by this absence, this terrible not knowing that had already consumed a third of her existence. But even in that moment of despair, she couldn't bring herself to stop searching. Hope had become both her salvation and her prison, the only thing that gave meaning to her days and the very thing that prevented her from building a new life. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of Colorado, she believed, lay the truth that would finally set her free. 10 years had carved deep trenches through the Collins family's landscape of grief, reshaping relationships and revealing the different ways people navigate prolonged trauma. Emma Collins, now 24 and working as a social worker in San Francisco, had built a life deliberately distant from the endless speculation and investigation that consumed her mother's existence. During their weekly phone calls, she listened with practiced patience as Sarah recounted her latest theories, her newest leads, her unwavering belief that this year, this month, this week, would finally bring answers. The distance between mother and daughter had grown more pronounced after Emma's college graduation, when she chose not to return to Colorado for the annual vigil. The decision sparked their worst fight in years, with Sarah accusing Emma of abandoning her father and brother's memory, while Emma countered that Sarah had abandoned the living in pursuit of the dead. The harsh words were eventually retracted and forgiven, but they left scars that changed the fundamental dynamic of their relationship. Emma began to understand that she had lost not only her father and brother that June afternoon, but gradually, incrementally, her mother as well. Detective Mark Harrison, now 52 and considering retirement, carried the Collins case like a chronic injury that flared up whenever similar disappearances crossed his desk. His own marriage had suffered under the weight of his obsession with the case. His wife often complained that he was more devoted to the ghosts of David and Ryan Collins than to his own living family. The complaint wasn't entirely unfair. Harrison kept copies of the case files at home, spread across his garage workbench like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't abandon. His colleagues had stopped asking about the Collins case years ago, recognizing the haunted look that crossed his face whenever their names were mentioned. The detective's unofficial investigation had expanded far beyond the original parameters, encompassing dozens of similar disappearances across the Rocky Mountain region over the past century. He had identified patterns that troubled him, cases where outdoorsmen vanished without trace, leaving behind vehicles and camping equipment as if they had simply stepped into another dimension. Some of these cases dated back to the 1950s, suggesting either a natural phenomenon that defied explanation or something far more sinister, operating across generations in the mountain wilderness. Sarah's transformation over the decade had been profound and disturbing to those who remembered her before the tragedy. The cheerful elementary school teacher had evolved into something resembling a detective herself, accumulating expertise in search and rescue techniques, wilderness survival, and criminal investigation that rivaled many professionals. Her dining room command center had expanded to fill half the house with detailed maps, photographs, and timelines, covering every available wall surface. She had learned to read topographical maps like literature, could identify animal tracks in photographs, and had memorized the behavioral patterns of every predator species native to Colorado. The financial cost of her decade-long investigation had been catastrophic. Sarah had sold their family home, downsizing to a small apartment where she could dedicate most of her income to funding search efforts. She had hired 3 different private investigators, each promising breakthrough results that never materialized. Her savings account, once robust enough to ensure a comfortable retirement, had been depleted to mere hundreds of dollars. Friends who had initially supported her quest began to express gentle concerns about her mental health, suggesting that it might be time to consider the possibility of acceptance and healing. But Sarah's determination remained unshakable, fueled by a mother's intuition that insisted her son was still alive somewhere in the vast wilderness. She had developed an almost mystical connection to the mountains, spending countless weekends hiking trails and exploring remote areas that official search teams had never investigated. Her apartment walls displayed hundreds of photographs she had taken during these solo expeditions, images of hidden valleys, forgotten mining claims, and caves that could potentially harbor secrets. The 10th anniversary vigil drew an even smaller crowd than previous years, consisting mainly of Sarah's most dedicated supporters and a handful of true crime enthusiasts who had discovered the case through online forums. Emma had flown in from California for the event, her first return to Colorado in 3 years. The reunion between mother and daughter was bittersweet, marked by the recognition of how much both had changed. Emma saw her mother's dedication with new eyes, understanding it simultaneously as an act of profound love and a form of self-destruction that threatened to consume what remained of their family. During her week-long visit, Emma made a disturbing discovery while helping her mother organize the ever-expanding case files. Hidden beneath stacks of search reports and witness statements, she found evidence of Sarah's mounting desperation, correspondence with psychics who claimed to commune with the dead, payments to online mediums who promised spiritual connections to David and Ryan, and even a contract with a dowser who claimed he could locate human remains using supernatural abilities. The revelation sparked a series of difficult conversations between mother and daughter, culminating in Emma's ultimatum. Sarah needed to seek professional help for what was clearly becoming an unhealthy obsession, or Emma would be forced to limit their contact even further. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence, both women recognizing that they stood at a crossroads that would determine not only their relationship, but Sarah's very survival. 15 years had transformed the Collins disappearance from an active investigation into a local legend, the kind of story that old-timers shared with newcomers as proof of the mountain's capacity for swallowing human lives without explanation. Yet, Sarah Collins remained undeterred by the passage of time, her faith in eventual answers growing stronger rather than weaker as the years accumulated. At 54, she had become a fixture in Colorado's true crime community, known throughout online forums and cold case groups as the woman who refused to surrender to the statistics that proclaimed her husband and son officially dead. The relationship between Sarah and Emma had stabilized into an uneasy détente after their confrontation 5 years earlier. Emma had learned to support her mother from a distance, understanding that attempting to pull Sarah away from her investigation would only drive them further apart. Instead, she provided emotional support during their regular phone calls while maintaining firm boundaries about her own involvement in the search. Emma had built a successful career as a family therapist, specializing in trauma recovery, work that gave her unique insight into her mother's psychological state and the recognition that some forms of healing simply cannot be forced. Detective Harrison had officially retired from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department 3 years prior, but retirement had only freed him to pursue the Collins case with renewed intensity. Without the constraints of active duty and other cases demanding his attention, he had transformed his garage into an unofficial cold case unit, complete with evidence boards, filing cabinets, and a computer system dedicated exclusively to tracking missing persons across the Rocky Mountain region. His wife had initially opposed this obsession, but eventually came to accept it as the price of their marriage. Harrison would pursue his ghosts, and she would find meaning in other aspects of their life together. The retired detective had made several breakthrough discoveries during his years of independent investigation, though none had yet yielded the answers he desperately sought. Through careful analysis of decades-old case files, he had identified a cluster of disappearances along a specific corridor of the Rocky Mountains, all involving experienced outdoorsmen who vanished under similar circumstances. The pattern suggested either a serial predator operating over multiple decades or geographic features that created consistently deadly conditions for hikers and campers. Harrison's most significant finding had come through his partnership with a geologist from the Colorado School of Mines who helped him understand the unique underground features of the Crystal Creek region. The area sat atop an extensive network of limestone caves and underground rivers, some of which had never been fully mapped or explored. The geologist explained that sudden sinkholes could theoretically open and close again, swallowing people and equipment before naturally concealing the evidence of their existence. It was a plausible explanation for how David and Ryan could have vanished so completely, though it remained unprovable without extensive excavation efforts that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sarah's investigation had evolved to incorporate cutting-edge technology that hadn't existed in 2009. She had learned to use ground-penetrating radar equipment, borrowed from sympathetic construction companies, to search for anomalies in the earth that might indicate burial sites or collapsed cave systems. She had also embraced drone technology, deploying remote-controlled aircraft equipped with high-resolution cameras to survey areas too dangerous or inaccessible for human searchers. These tools had revealed several promising locations, but each investigation had ultimately yielded only disappointment and renewed determination to continue searching. The financial cost of her technological approach had forced Sarah to become creative about fundraising. She had launched a crowdfunding campaign that attracted small donations from true crime enthusiasts around the world, people who had become invested in her story through podcast appearances and online forums. The campaign raised enough money to fund several professional search efforts, including the hiring of a cadaver dog team that spent 3 days searching the areas Harrison had identified as most promising based on his geological research. On a cold morning in March, 15 years and 9 months after David and Ryan's disappearance, Sarah received a phone call that would forever change the trajectory of her investigation. The caller identified himself as Captain Rodriguez from the Colorado Springs Fire Department, and his voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering news that could be either devastating or redemptive. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "I believe we may have found something related to your case. If this case has already gripped you, hit the like button. It helps the channel bring more stories like this and helps David and Ryan Collins' story reach more people." The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2025, cutting through the ordinary quiet of Sarah Collins' morning routine like a blade through fabric. Captain Luis Rodriguez of the Colorado Springs Fire Department spoke with the measured cadence of someone who had delivered both miracles and tragedies, his words carrying weight that 15 years of waiting had prepared Sarah to receive. A wildfire suppression crew working in a remote section of the Pike National Forest had discovered what appeared to be human remains in a previously unmapped cave system approximately 40 miles northeast of the original search area around Crystal Creek. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her phone, her mind racing through 15 years of theories and possibilities while her heart hammered against her ribs. Captain Rodriguez explained that the discovery had been accidental. Firefighters rappelling into a deep ravine to establish a firebreak had spotted what looked like fabric caught on a rock ledge near a concealed cave entrance. Further investigation revealed a narrow opening that led to a substantial underground chamber, and inside that chamber they had found something that might finally answer the questions that had consumed Sarah's life. Detective Harrison received Sarah's call 20 minutes later, his own hands shaking as he absorbed the news that the case he had carried for 15 years might finally be approaching resolution. Within hours, both Sarah and the retired detective were driving toward the coordinates Captain Rodriguez had provided, neither speaking during the 2-hour journey through mountain highways that seemed to stretch endlessly toward either vindication or heartbreak. The landscape outside their windows carried the scars of recent wildfires, blackened trees standing like sentinels over a wounded earth that was slowly revealing its secrets. The cave system that would forever change the Collins case lay hidden in a ravine so remote that it had never appeared on any hiking map or geological survey. The wildfire that led to its discovery had burned away decades of undergrowth and debris, exposing a rock formation that concealed an entrance barely wide enough for a human being to navigate. Colorado Springs Fire Department specialists had secured the area and established safety protocols for what was clearly going to be a complex recovery operation requiring coordination between multiple agencies. Sarah stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at the rope systems and specialized equipment that would soon either end her 15-year vigil or extend it into territory she couldn't bear to contemplate. The cave entrance was visible from above, a dark slash in the rock face that seemed to exhale cold air, carrying scents of mineral water and something else, something that made her stomach clench with recognition she couldn't yet acknowledge. Captain Rodriguez approached with news that the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department was en route with forensic specialists and the coroner's office, transforming the remote wilderness into a crime scene that would soon buzz with official activity. The recovery operation began at dawn the following day, with specialized cave rescue teams descending into darkness that had remained undisturbed for decades. Sarah waited at the surface with Emma, who had taken emergency leave from her job in California, to be present for whatever revelations the cave might yield. Mother and daughter stood together in silence, their relationship transformed by the gravity of the moment, from years of careful distance to something approaching the closeness they had shared before tragedy redefined their family. Detective Harrison had positioned himself near the command post, his unofficial status as a retired officer, granting him access to information as it emerged from the cave system. The first reports were deliberately vague, describing possible human remains and associated artifacts, without providing the specific details that Sarah desperately needed to hear. But as the morning progressed, fragments of information began to paint a picture that was both heartbreaking and somehow reassuring in its finality. The cave system proved to be more extensive than initial surveys had suggested, with multiple chambers connected by narrow passages that would have been nearly impossible to navigate without proper equipment and training. In the deepest accessible chamber, approximately 60 feet underground, the recovery team found evidence of human habitation that appeared to date back many years. There were remnants of camping equipment, including a sleeping bag that bore a manufacturer's label consistent with gear that had been popular in the late 2000s. More significantly, they discovered personal items that began to tell a story Sarah had been waiting 15 years to hear. A child's baseball cap with the Denver Broncos logo, faded by time and moisture, but still recognizable. A man's wristwatch, its battery long dead, but its engraving still legible. To David, love always, Sarah, Christmas 2008. These artifacts, small and seemingly insignificant to anyone else, represented evidence of lives that had ended in this hidden place, far from home, far from hope, far from the family that had never stopped searching for them. The discovery of skeletal remains would come later that afternoon, carefully photographed and catalogued by forensic specialists who treated each bone as a piece of evidence that might finally explain how David and Ryan Collins had ended up in a cave system dozens of miles from their intended camping destination. The preliminary examination suggested that the remains belonged to an adult and a child, though definitive identification would require DNA testing that could take several weeks to complete. As the sun set over the mountain ravine that had guarded its secrets for 15 years, Sarah Collins found herself experiencing emotions she had never expected to feel. Relief mingled with profound sadness. Vindication wrestled with devastating loss, and hope transformed into something else entirely. A strange kind of peace that came from finally knowing that her family's story had an ending, even if that ending wasn't the reunion she had spent half her adult life believing was still possible. The forensic examination of the cave system revealed a story more complex and heartbreaking than anyone had imagined during the 15 years of speculation surrounding the Collins disappearance. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead forensic anthropologist assigned to the case, worked with the methodical precision of someone who understood that bones and artifacts were the final voices of the dead, capable of speaking truths that might otherwise remain buried forever. Her preliminary findings suggested that David and Ryan Collins had survived their initial entry into the cave system for a significant period, possibly weeks, before succumbing to conditions that would challenge even experienced cavers. The cave had preserved evidence with remarkable fidelity, creating a time capsule that documented the final chapter of the Collins men's lives. Personal journals written on pages torn from a notebook revealed David's increasingly desperate attempts to find an exit from the underground labyrinth, his handwriting growing shakier as days turned into weeks without rescue. The entries, written in pencil that had faded but remained legible, painted a picture of a father trying to maintain his son's courage while privately confronting the growing realization that they might never escape their stone prison. Ryan's asthma inhaler, the same device that had been found in their truck 15 years earlier, was discovered empty in the deepest chamber of the cave system. This finding suggested a heartbreaking timeline. David had returned to their vehicle to retrieve the inhaler, possibly making multiple trips to gather supplies, before ultimately deciding to remain underground with his son rather than abandon him in the darkness. The decision spoke to a father's devotion that transcended rational calculation, choosing to face an uncertain fate together rather than risk separation in the wilderness. Detective Harrison studied the cave maps with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle that had consumed his professional life. The system's entrance had been concealed by a rock slide that occurred sometime after David and Ryan had entered, effectively sealing them inside while eliminating any external evidence of their presence. Geological surveys suggested that the rock slide had been triggered by natural factors, seasonal temperature changes and water erosion that gradually destabilized the cliff face above the cave entrance. It was a cruel coincidence of timing that had transformed a simple exploration into a death sentence. Sarah Collins stood in the cave entrance for the first time 3 days after the initial discovery, wearing specialized caving equipment provided by the rescue team. The descent into darkness felt like a pilgrimage to a sacred place, each step taking her deeper into the final chapter of her family's story. The cave walls bore scratches and marks where David had attempted to create hand and footholds, evidence of his desperate efforts to find an escape route that would lead them back to sunlight and safety. In some places, she could see where he had used rocks to chip away at the stone, trying to create passages that might lead to freedom. The makeshift camp that David and Ryan had established in the largest chamber revealed the full extent of their ordeal. They had rationed their limited food supplies with military precision, creating careful portions that stretched their provisions far beyond what should have been possible. Empty water bottles bore careful marks indicating David's system for tracking their consumption, while improvised tools fashioned from camping equipment showed his attempts to create the means for survival in an environment that offered no natural resources. Most heartbreaking of all were the games that father and son had created to maintain their sanity during their imprisonment. Rock formations had been arranged into patterns resembling checkerboards, while scratches on the cave walls revealed David's attempts to teach Ryan about constellations they couldn't see, using memory and imagination to maintain connection with the world above. These discoveries transformed the cave from a tomb into a testament to human resilience, showing how love and hope could persist even in the face of certain death. The forensic timeline suggested that Ryan had died first, his compromised respiratory system unable to cope with the cave's humid air and physical stress of their situation. David had continued to survive alone for an unknown period afterward, his final journal entries revealing a man who had made peace with his fate while expressing gratitude for the time he had been given with his son. The last entry, barely legible in the dim light reflected from his failing flashlight, consisted of messages to Sarah and Emma, words of love and apology that he somehow knew they would eventually read. DNA confirmation arrived 2 weeks after the discovery, officially ending the mystery that had defined the Collins family's existence for 15 years. The remains were indeed those of David and Ryan Collins, finally providing the closure that Sarah had simultaneously yearned for and feared. The news brought relief and devastation in equal measure, answering questions while creating new ones about how to process grief that had been frozen in time for over a decade. The cave system was sealed following the recovery operation, marked with a memorial plaque that would ensure future hikers understood the significance of the location. For Sarah, the closing of the cave represented both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of her role as a searcher, and the start of her journey as someone who had finally received the answers she had spent her adult life pursuing. The mountains had kept their secret for 15 years, but they had ultimately surrendered it to the persistence of love and the relentless march of time. The memorial service for David and Ryan Collins drew hundreds of people to a Denver chapel, creating a gathering that was part funeral, part celebration, and part conclusion to a mystery that had captivated Colorado's true crime community for 15 years. Sarah Collins, now 54 and bearing the accumulated weight of her long vigil, spoke with a voice that carried both profound sadness and unexpected strength. She had spent 15 years imagining this moment, but the reality of finally laying her husband and son to rest brought emotions she had never anticipated. Relief mingled with survivor's guilt. Closure wrestled with the strange emptiness that came from no longer having a mission that defined her existence. Emma Collins delivered a eulogy that acknowledged not only her father and brother, but also her mother's extraordinary dedication to finding them. Speaking to the assembled crowd, Emma described Sarah's 15-year search as an act of love so profound that it had transcended rational thought, transforming grief into purpose and desperation into determination. The daughter's words carried forgiveness for the years when their family's tragedy had overshadowed their living relationship, recognizing that Sarah's obsession had been the only way she knew to honor her missing family members. Detective Harrison, now fully retired and nearing 60, found himself confronting emotions he had buried beneath years of professional investigation. The discovery in the cave had vindicated his instincts about the case, while simultaneously highlighting the limitations of traditional search and rescue methods. In his brief remarks at the service, Harrison spoke about the importance of never abandoning hope, even when logic suggested that hope was futile. He announced his intention to establish a foundation dedicated to improving search techniques for missing persons cases, using lessons learned from the Collins investigation to prevent other families from enduring similar ordeals. The forensic evidence had painted a detailed picture of David and Ryan's final weeks, revealing a story of survival against impossible odds that transformed tragedy into something approaching heroism. David's journals, preserved by the cave's stable environment, documented his methodical approach to their situation, creating systems for conserving water, rationing food, and maintaining sanitation in their underground prison. More importantly, they revealed his constant efforts to keep Ryan's spirits up, inventing stories and games that distracted from their desperate circumstances. The psychological profile that emerged from David's writings showed a man who had never succumbed to panic or despair, instead channeling his fear into productive action and protective love for his son. Child psychologists who reviewed the evidence noted Ryan's remarkable resilience, suggesting that his father's calm leadership had helped the 12-year-old maintain hope even as their situation became increasingly hopeless. The boy's own brief journal entries, written in the careful script of someone trying to be brave, revealed his trust in his father's ability to find a way home. The cave system that had imprisoned them proved to be a geological anomaly, featuring underground streams and chambers that created a complex environment capable of sustaining life for extended periods. Water sources within the cave had provided hydration, while small cave-dwelling creatures had offered limited protein sources that David had carefully prepared for his son. The makeshift tools and shelter arrangements found at the site demonstrated David's resourcefulness, showing how he had used camping equipment and natural cave features to create the most livable conditions possible under impossible circumstances. Sarah's transformation following the discovery was profound but gradual, requiring months of therapy to process emotions that had been suspended for 15 years. The woman who had become Colorado's most persistent amateur investigator now faced the challenge of rebuilding an identity that wasn't defined by searching for the missing. Her apartment, once dominated by maps and evidence boards, slowly transformed back into a living space as she processed the reality that her vigil had finally ended. The transition proved more difficult than she had anticipated, leaving her feeling purposeless in ways that surprised even her therapist. The media attention surrounding the case's resolution brought national coverage that transformed the Collins story into a symbol of parental devotion and the importance of never abandoning hope. True crime podcasts that had previously covered the disappearance produced follow-up episodes examining the discovery and its implications for other cold cases. Sarah found herself reluctantly thrust into a spotlight she had never sought, receiving interview requests from journalists who wanted to explore the psychology of long-term grief and the phenomenal persistence that had kept her searching when everyone else had moved on. The financial costs of her 15-year investigation had left Sarah in precarious circumstances, forcing her to accept a crowdfunding campaign organized by supporters who had followed her story over the years. The donations, combined with speaking fees from true crime conventions and victim advocacy groups, provided enough income to stabilize her finances while she contemplated her future. For the first time in 15 years, Sarah found herself thinking about tomorrow rather than yesterday, considering possibilities for her remaining life that didn't revolve around the search that had defined her existence since 2009. The cave where David and Ryan had died was declared a protected site by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department, ensuring that their final resting place would remain undisturbed while serving as a reminder of the mountain's capacity to both shelter and trap those who enter unprepared. The memorial plaque installed at the sealed entrance bore a simple inscription, "In memory of David and Ryan Collins, who faced the darkness together and showed us the true meaning of love and courage." 6 months after the discovery that ended her 15-year search, Sarah Collins found herself confronting the most unexpected challenge of her journey, learning how to live without the mission that had defined her existence since 2009. The woman who had become known throughout Colorado's true crime community as the mother who never gave up now faced the disorienting reality of having received the answers she had spent half her adult life pursuing. The closure she had desperately sought brought not the peace she had imagined, but a strange emptiness that forced her to confront who she was beyond her role as David and Ryan's relentless advocate. Emma Collins had taken extended leave from her therapy practice in California to spend time with her mother during this crucial transition period, recognizing that Sarah needed support in ways that were completely different from the encouragement she had required during her search years. Mother and daughter worked together to dismantle the command center, that had occupied Sarah's apartment for over a decade, carefully sorting through files, photographs, and maps that documented every twist and turn of their family's tragedy. Some items were donated to cold case advocacy groups, while others were preserved as personal mementos of a journey that had transformed ordinary grief into extraordinary determination. Detective Harrison had found his own form of closure through the establishment of the Collins Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to improving search and rescue techniques for missing persons cases in wilderness areas. Using his retirement savings and donations from supporters of Sarah's story, Harrison created a program that provided advanced training for search teams while funding technological improvements that might prevent other families from enduring the Collins family's ordeal. The Foundation's first initiative involved mapping unmapped cave systems throughout the Rocky Mountains using ground-penetrating radar and drone technology to identify potential hazards that could trap unprepared adventurers. The Foundation's work had already yielded promising results, discovering 3 previously unknown cave systems in areas popular with hikers and campers. Each discovery was carefully documented and reported to park services, creating safety protocols that would warn future visitors about potential dangers. Harrison's expertise, honed through 15 years of investigating the Collins case, proved invaluable in developing search patterns that accounted for the kinds of geological anomalies that had trapped David and Ryan in their underground prison. Sarah's gradual return to teaching provided structure during her adjustment period, though she found herself changed in ways that affected her interaction with students and colleagues. The woman who had once been known for her cheerful demeanor now carried a gravity that came from intimate familiarity with life's capacity for sudden tragedy. Yet, this depth of experience also made her more effective as an educator, bringing authenticity to lessons about perseverance and resilience that her 4th-grade students seemed to instinctively understand. Her classroom walls, once decorated with cheerful posters and student artwork, now included a simple memorial corner featuring photographs of David and Ryan alongside inspirational quotes about the importance of family love and never giving up hope. Students often asked about the photographs, leading to age-appropriate conversations about loss, memory, and the different ways people cope with difficult situations. These discussions revealed Sarah's gift for translating her extraordinary experience into lessons that children could understand and apply to their own challenges. The true crime community that had supported Sarah's search efforts during the long years of uncertainty continued to follow her story as she navigated life after answers. Her appearance at a Denver convention for cold case advocates drew a standing ovation from an audience that understood the significance of her journey's conclusion. During her presentation, Sarah spoke about the importance of maintaining hope while also accepting the possibility that some questions might never be answered, encouraging other families of missing persons to find balance between searching and living. Emma's relationship with her mother had evolved into something deeper and more honest than their connection before the tragedy, built on mutual recognition of the ways they had both been shaped by extraordinary circumstances. The daughter's training as a therapist provided insight into her mother's psychological journey, while her personal experience as a survivor of family tragedy brought authenticity to her professional work with other trauma victims. Together, they had created a foundation for moving forward that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. The cave system where David and Ryan had died became an unexpected pilgrimage site for people dealing with their own losses, though access remained strictly controlled by park authorities. Sarah visited the memorial plaque twice during her first year after the discovery, finding that the location provided not the closure she had expected, but rather a sense of connection to the final chapter of her family's story. The mountains that had guarded the secret for 15 years now served as a monument to persistence, love, and the complex relationship between hope and acceptance. As autumn arrived in Colorado, marking nearly 16 years since David and Ryan's disappearance, Sarah Collins stood in her apartment, now decorated as a home rather than a command center, and contemplated a future that was entirely her own to define. The woman who had spent her adult life searching for answers had finally found them, along with something else she hadn't expected, the understanding that healing was not a destination, but a journey, one that would continue for whatever years remained to her. The Collins case had taught Colorado's law enforcement and search and rescue communities valuable lessons about persistence, technology, and the importance of never dismissing a mother's intuition. But perhaps more importantly, it had demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which love will go in pursuit of truth, and the way that tragedy can transform ordinary people into forces of nature capable of moving mountains, or at least of refusing to let mountains keep their secrets forever. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of David and Ryan Collins. We'll see you in the next video.